Listen carefully, not with your ears but with your spirit. Because this is not just a message, it is a reminder of something heaven has already spoken over you. God says, before you were ever seen, you were already known. Before you took your first breath, your purpose had already taken shape. You are not random. You are not an accident. And you are certainly not replaceable. There has never been, and there will never be, another you. Not just because of how you look, not just because of your personality, but because of the exact combination of gifts placed inside of you. Think about that. Your mind, your experiences, your pain, your passions, your voice, your perspective, they have all been woven together with divine precision. God did not just give you gifts. He gave you a specific arrangement of gifts that no one else on this earth carries in the same way. That means something. It means there are doors that will only open when you walk up to them. It means there are people who will only be reached when you speak. It means there are problems assigned to your life that require your exact design. And yet, many of you have been comparing your journey to others, comparing your timing to others, comparing your gifts to louder, more visible, more celebrated gifts. But God says, comparison is the thief of calling. You were never meant to be a copy. You were created to be a revelation. Do you understand? If you try to be someone else, you actually rob the world of the only version of you that exists. And the tragedy is not failure. The tragedy is living your entire life never realizing who you were created to be. Some of you have been hiding your gifts because they feel small. Some of you have been silencing your voice because it trembles. Some of you have been waiting for perfection before you move. But God says, I did not call you because you were perfect. I called you because you were willing. Your gifts were never meant to impress people. They were meant to impact lives. Even the parts of your story you wish you could erase, the heartbreak, the confusion, the setbacks, God says those are not disqualifications. They are ingredients. They are shaping your compassion. They are sharpening your wisdom. They are deepening your understanding so that when you speak, you don't just speak from knowledge, you speak from truth. You are being formed for something greater than what you can currently see. So stop dismissing yourself. Stop shrinking back. Stop telling yourself someone else could do this better. No, someone else could do it differently, but no one can do it the way you were designed to. God says, the world does not need another imitation. It needs your obedience, and obedience is not always loud. Sometimes it looks like taking one step when you are afraid. Sometimes it looks like using your gift when no one is watching. Sometimes it looks like believing in what God placed in you, even when you don't yet see results. Hear this clearly. You are not behind. You are not forgotten. And you are not lacking. Everything you need for your assignment has already been placed within you. Now it must be activated. So rise. Rise in your identity. Rise in your calling. Rise in the confidence that heaven made no mistake when it made you, because God says, you are the only person on this earth with this exact combination of gifts, and the world is waiting for you to use them. Before you ever opened your eyes to this world, before your lungs filled with breath, before anyone called your name, you were already known. Not in a distant, abstract way, but intimately, intentionally, completely. There was never a moment where you were an afterthought. There was never a second where your existence was uncertain. You were decided, established, and spoken into being with purpose woven into every part of you. There are people who walk through life believing they are here by chance, as if existence is a coincidence and identity is something to be assembled randomly over time. But there is a deeper truth calling out to your spirit, something that contradicts every lie of insignificance you have ever believed. Your life did not begin at birth. Your story did not start when people noticed you. Your purpose did not activate when you achieved something. You were already carrying meaning before any of that unfolded. God saw you before the world did. Not just your face, not just your form, but your future, your thoughts, your struggles, your victories, your questions, your becoming. Nothing about you caught heaven off guard. Nothing about your personality, your tendencies, your uniqueness surprised the one who created you. Every detail was considered. Every trait was intentional. Even the parts of you that you struggle to understand were not placed in you carelessly. There is something profound about being known before being seen. It means your identity is not dependent on recognition. It means your value does not increase when others affirm you, and it does not decrease when they overlook you. You were fully known in a place where human opinions did not exist, where comparison had no voice, where validation was not needed because you were already accepted. Somewhere along the way, many begin to forget this truth. Life introduces noise. Expectations begin to form. People project their definitions onto you, shaping narratives about who you should be, how you should act, what you should pursue. Slowly, the awareness of being divinely known gets buried under layers of pressure, doubt, and confusion. You begin to question yourself, not realizing that the questions you are asking were already answered before you were born. You may have asked, "Why am I like this?" Or "Why do I think this way?" Or "Why do I feel drawn to certain things that others don't understand?" Those questions are not signs of randomness, they are clues pointing back to your design. There is intention behind your inclinations. There is purpose behind your awareness. There is meaning behind what stirs your spirit. Being chosen before time means your life is not reactionary, it is prophetic. It is not just about what happens to you, but about what is meant to flow through you. There is a difference between existing and being sent, and deep within you, there is a knowing that you are not just here to occupy space, but to fulfill something that cannot be replicated by anyone else. Even your environment, your upbringing, the circumstances that surrounded your early life, none of it exists outside the awareness of God. That does not mean everything you experienced was good, but it does mean nothing was wasted. What you went through did not erase your purpose. What you faced did not cancel your calling. In ways you may not yet fully understand, even those experiences have been woven into who you are becoming. To be known before time also means you were seen beyond your current version. Right now, you may feel incomplete. You may feel like you are still figuring things out, still searching, still growing. But God did not create you based on your present limitations. He created you based on your full potential. He saw the finished work when all you can see is the process. There is something powerful about realizing that your future self was already considered when you were created. The strength you will develop, the wisdom you will carry, the impact you will have, it was all part of the vision from the beginning. You are not evolving into something unknown, you are unfolding into something that was already established. This is why there is a persistent pull inside of you, something that refuses to let you settle into mediocrity or complacency. Even when you try to ignore it, even when you try to silence it, it remains. That pull is not pressure from the outside, it is purpose from within. It is the echo of what was spoken over you before time began. There will be moments where you feel disconnected from this truth. Moments where life feels heavy, where clarity feels distant, where your sense of direction seems blurred. In those moments, it is easy to assume that you have lost your way or that you were never on a path to begin with. But being chosen before time means your direction is not fragile. It is not easily broken. It is not dependent on perfect decisions. Even when you feel lost, you are not outside of what was spoken over you. Even when you feel uncertain, you are still within the awareness of the one who formed you. Your confusion does not cancel your calling. Your doubts do not erase your design. Your pauses do not undo your purpose. There is also a sacred responsibility that comes with this truth. To be known before time is not just comforting, it is awakening. It calls you to live with awareness. It calls you to move with intention. It calls you to stop treating your life as something casual or insignificant. You begin to realize that your time matters, your choices matter, your voice matters. Not because you have something to prove, but because you have something to express that was placed inside of you deliberately. There is a weight to your existence that cannot be ignored once you become aware of it. You were not created to drift. You were not created to blend into the background of other people's lives. You were not created to spend your days questioning whether you matter. There is a divine certainty attached to your existence, even if you have not fully embraced it yet. And even now, there is something within you responding to this truth, something recognizing it, even if you cannot fully explain it. It is not new information, it is a remembered truth. It is something your spirit has always known, even when your mind has been uncertain. Because before anyone ever called your name, before anyone ever formed an opinion about you, before you ever tried to define yourself, you were already defined in a place beyond time, in a way that cannot be undone by circumstance, opinion, or doubt. There is something sacred about the way you were formed, not just that you were created, but how you were created. The details of your inner world were not assembled randomly, and your abilities are not a scattered collection of traits. There is structure in what God placed inside of you. There is design in what you call personality. There is intentional architecture in what you call talent. What you carry is not generic. It is not mass-produced. It is not duplicated in any other human being on earth. You may have spent time trying to understand yourself by comparing yourself to others, trying to find similarities that make you feel less alone or differences that help you feel more defined. But the truth is deeper than comparison. You are not a variation of someone else's calling. You are not a version of someone else's assignment. You are a distinct expression of divine intention. And that expression carries a combination of gifts that cannot be replicated, reversed, or transferred. Within you are layers of ability that do not always make sense at first glance. You might notice that you think differently than those around you, that you feel things more deeply in certain areas, or that you are drawn to problems others overlook. You may have wondered why certain responsibilities feel natural to you while others feel foreign or draining. That is not inconsistency. That is design specificity. The way your mind processes, the way your heart responds, the way your hands create, the way your voice communicates, all of it has been calibrated with purpose. There are gifts in you that are obvious, the ones people might easily recognize. But there are also hidden gifts, the ones that reveal themselves over time, often through experience, pressure, or responsibility. Some gifts only surface when you are placed in environments you did not choose. Some gifts only emerge when you are forced to rely on something deeper than comfort. And some gifts only become visible after you have walked through situations that stretched you beyond your understanding. The combination of your gifts is not accidental. It is not just what you can do, but how your abilities interact with each other. There are people who may share one or two of your traits, but no one shares the exact blend of all of them. That combination creates a unique expression of problem-solving, creativity, insight, endurance, leadership, empathy, or innovation that cannot be duplicated. This is why certain paths feel like they fit you, even when you cannot fully explain why. This is why certain responsibilities awaken something inside you that you did not know was there. And this is also why some environments feel restrictive, not because they are bad, but because they were not designed for the fullness of what you carry. When God forms a person, He does not simply assign abilities, He weaves them together in harmony. Strength is balanced with sensitivity. Logic is paired with intuition. Creativity is anchored with discipline. Compassion is blended with discernment. And even the areas where you feel weak are often positioned to protect you from becoming unbalanced in your strength. You are not missing anything essential. You are not incomplete in the way you often assume. What feels like lack is often simply undeveloped expression. What feels like delay is often preparation for responsible use. What feels like confusion is often the early stage of clarity forming within you. The world tends to teach people to measure themselves by what is visible. Titles, achievements, recognition, and external validation become the standard of value. But divine design operates differently. Some of the most significant gifts in you are not immediately visible. They are not always loud or impressive at first encounter. Some of your most powerful abilities are relational, perceptive, or internal. They shape outcomes quietly without needing attention to validate their importance. You may carry the ability to bring peace into chaotic environments without realizing it. You may carry insight that helps others make decisions they could not make alone. You may carry resilience that allows you to remain steady when others collapse. You may carry creativity that redefines how problems are solved. You may carry empathy that reaches people who feel unseen. None of these require applause to be real. They only require expression to become effective. The tragedy is not that people lack gifts. The tragedy is that many never learn how their gifts work together. They isolate parts of themselves instead of recognizing the system within them. They treat their abilities as separate fragments instead of understanding them as a unified design. But your gifts were not meant to operate in isolation. They were meant to function in combination, each strengthening the other, each revealing something deeper about your assignment. Even your limitations are part of this design. Not every area of difficulty is meant to be removed. Some are meant to direct your dependency, to keep you grounded, to shape humility, or to position you in alignment with others who complement what you lack. There is wisdom in what you cannot do as much as there is purpose in what you can. When you begin to see yourself through this lens, comparison starts to lose its power. Because comparison only makes sense when you believe everyone carries the same design. But when you understand that your combination is unique, comparison becomes irrelevant. You are no longer trying to measure yourself against others who were never designed with your structure. There is also responsibility attached to this understanding. To carry a unique combination of gifts is to carry stewardship. It means your abilities are not just for personal comfort or validation. They are meant to be expressed in ways that serve, build, restore, create, or transform. What you carry is not meant to remain dormant or private forever. It is meant to interact with the world in ways that reflect the intention behind it. There will be times when you underestimate what you carry because it feels familiar to you. But familiarity does not equal insignificance. Often what is most powerful in you is what you overlook because it feels natural. You assume others must have it too, but they do not. What is effortless for you may be extraordinary in another context. And there will also be times when you question whether your combination is enough, whether it is too small, too unusual, too quiet, or too different. But the value of your gifts is not determined by how they compare to others. It is determined by how faithfully they are expressed in alignment with their purpose. You are not assembled from leftover traits or random abilities. You are crafted with intention so precise that even your contradictions serve a function. Even the tensions within you are part of a greater harmony waiting to be understood more fully over time. Comparison begins quietly. It does not announce itself as danger. It arrives as observation, as curiosity, as awareness of others. At first it seems harmless, even useful. You look at someone else's progress, someone else's talent, someone else's confidence, and you measure yourself against it without realizing that in that very moment, something subtle begins to shift inside you. Your focus moves away from your own design and starts attaching itself to someone else's expression of life. And this is where the distortion begins. Because comparison does not tell the truth about you. It only magnifies what you think you lack while minimizing what you already carry. It takes the unique structure of your life and tries to fit it into the framework of someone else's calling. It takes your timing and tries to align it with someone else's season. It takes your voice and tries to judge it against voices that were never meant to sound like yours. There is a deep deception in this process. It convinces you that visibility equals value, that speed equals success, and that similarity equals worth. But none of these assumptions are rooted in truth. They are emotional reactions to what you see, not spiritual understanding of who you are. When you compare yourself, you are not just looking at others. You are simultaneously disconnecting from yourself. You begin to overlook the quiet evidence of your own growth. You begin to undervalue the subtle progress that does not look impressive on the surface but carries deep significance in your formation. You start questioning whether what you carry is enough, not because it has changed, but because your perception has been redirected. Comparison also creates unnecessary pressure. It forces you into timelines that were never assigned to you. It makes you feel behind when you are simply on a different path. It makes you rush processes that were designed to mature slowly. And in that rushing, you risk missing the depth that was meant to be formed within you. There are people who appear ahead, but you cannot see the full story behind their visibility. There are people who seem confident, but you do not see the battles that shape that confidence. There are people who look established, but you do not see the years of unseen development that brought them to that point. Comparison removes context and replaces it with illusion. And when illusion becomes your measuring tool, truth becomes harder to recognize. One of the most dangerous effects of comparison is silence. Not physical silence, but internal silence. The silence of not expressing what you carry because you feel it is not good enough. The silence of not starting because someone else already started better. The silence of not developing your gifts because you believe they are inferior. Slowly, your voice becomes muted not by external rejection but by internal doubt. This is how purpose gets delayed without any external obstruction. Nothing outside stops you, but something inside convinces you to pause. And yet, the irony is that the very things you admire in others often exist in seed form within you. Expressed differently, shaped uniquely, waiting for development in your own environment. But comparison blinds you to that recognition. It makes you assume that because your expression is different, it is lesser. When in truth, difference is evidence of design, not deficiency. There is no universal template for calling. There is no single model of success that every life is meant to replicate. What works for one person is often a reflection of their assignment, not a standard for yours. But comparison ignores this truth and turns observation into obligation. It makes you feel like you must become what you see in order to be valid. And that is where identity begins to fracture. Because identity is not formed by imitation. It is formed by understanding. It is formed by recognizing the internal structure of your own gifts, your own timing, your own process. When you understand yourself, you no longer need to compete with what was never assigned to you. You begin to recognize that your path is not late, not early, but aligned with its own rhythm. There is also a spiritual weight to comparison that is often overlooked. It shifts your trust away from divine timing and places it into human measurement. It makes you evaluate your life through external benchmarks rather than internal conviction. And over time, this weakens confidence, not because your ability has diminished, but because your reference point has been misplaced. You start to believe that visibility is proof of calling, when in reality, calling exists long before visibility. You start to believe that applause confirms worth, when in reality, worth exists before recognition. You start to believe that delay means denial, when in reality, delay often means development. Comparison cannot see process. It only sees outcomes. And because of that, it will always misinterpret where you are. There is a hidden cost in constantly looking sideways. You lose sensitivity to your own progress. You stop noticing subtle growth because it does not match the dramatic pace of what you observe in others. You begin to overlook the fact that you are becoming, even when you are not yet arriving. And this is why many people feel stuck even when they are moving. Because they are measuring movement through the wrong lens. Comparison also creates emotional exhaustion. It forces you to carry the weight of multiple journeys that were never yours. It makes you mentally live in places you were never meant to inhabit. It splits your focus between your own path and someone else's narrative. And in that division, clarity becomes difficult to maintain. But when comparison loses its influence, something shifts internally. Attention returns to where it belongs. Awareness comes back to your own process. You begin to see your journey not as lacking, but as unfolding. You begin to recognize that what you thought was delay was actually formation. What you thought was weakness was actually undeveloped strength. What you thought was insignificance was actually hidden preparation. And slowly, the pressure to be someone else begins to dissolve. Because you were never called to replicate another life, you were called to express your own. And that expression cannot be measured by external standards that were never designed for your structure. Even your pace carries meaning. Even your timing carries wisdom. Even your silence carries formation. But comparison interrupts that understanding and replaces it with impatience. And impatience rarely produces depth. There is a place where you eventually realize that what you carry does not need to compete in order to be valid. It only needs to be expressed faithfully. And in that realization, something stabilizes within you. The need to prove begins to fade. The need to match begins to lose power. The need to be like others begins to weaken. What remains is awareness of your own path, your own unfolding. Your own unique expression that was never meant to look like anyone else's pain is rarely understood in the moment it arrives. It does not announce its purpose. IT does not explain its intention. It simply enters experience, often without permission, and reshapes everything it touches. In the beginning, it feels like disruption. It feels like loss. It feels like confusion that has no language. And yet, within that very discomfort, something deeper is being formed that cannot be seen with immediate eyes. There are moments in life that feel like they are undoing you, but what is actually happening is far more complex. What feels like breaking is often shaping. What feels like ending is often redirection. What feels like abandonment is often isolation for the sake of refinement. Pain has a way of removing what comfort could never remove. It strips illusions. It exposes foundations. It reveals what remains when everything unnecessary is taken away. And in that revealing, truth begins to surface. You begin to notice that pain has a strange way of teaching awareness. It slows you down enough to see what you ignored when life was easier. It sharpens perception in areas where you were previously careless. It forces reflection where there was once distraction. And, although it is uncomfortable, it begins to build something within you that ease never could. There is a depth that only pressure can produce. Not all growth comes from instruction. Some growth comes from endurance. Some lessons are not learned through explanation but through experience that cannot be avoided. In those seasons, you are not being punished. You are being positioned. Because certain capacities in you cannot be activated without tension, without weight, without resistance that challenges your natural response. Pain has a way of revealing strength you did not know you had. Not theoretical strength, but real strength that appears only when you are forced to stand in conditions that do not support comfort. You discover that you can endure what you once thought would destroy you. You discover that you can continue even when clarity is absent. You discover that something within you refuses to fully collapse, even when everything around you suggests that collapse is inevitable. This is not coincidence. This is formation. There is also something deeply refining about emotional pain. It reshapes how you see people. It changes how you listen. It deepens empathy in ways that cannot be manufactured. When you have been wounded, you no longer interpret others superficially. You begin to recognize unspoken struggles. You begin to understand silence differently. You begin to see behind behavior into the deeper layers of human experience. But this depth does not come without cost. Pain often isolates before it elevates. It separates you from familiar environments so that unfamiliar understanding can develop within you. In isolation, you are forced into confrontation with yourself. There is no distraction strong enough to override the internal questions that rise during such seasons. You begin to face thoughts you previously avoided. You begin to process emotions that were previously suppressed. You begin to encounter parts of yourself that were hidden beneath routine and comfort. And although this process feels heavy, it is necessary for alignment. There are things about your calling that cannot be understood in surface-level thinking. There are dimensions of your purpose that require depth of character, not just talent. Pain is often the environment where that character is formed. It does not simply test you, it develops structure within you that stability alone cannot create. Even delay can be a form of development when seen through the right lens. When answers are not immediate, when doors remain closed, when clarity is withheld, something within you is being strengthened that impatience would have weakened. Waiting becomes training. Uncertainty becomes sharpening. Silence becomes instruction. You may not recognize it while you are inside it, but there is intelligence behind what feels random. There is direction within what feels stagnant. There is purpose within what feels painful. And still, pain does not feel gentle while it is working. It confronts identity in ways that feel uncomfortable. It challenges assumptions you held about yourself. It exposes dependency on things that cannot sustain you. It reveals emotional anchors that were never secure. And in doing so, it removes false foundations so that something more stable can eventually be built. There are seasons where you realize that what you thought was stability was actually dependency on circumstances. And when those circumstances shift, you are forced to discover a deeper form of stability within yourself. Not based on environment, but based on internal grounding that does not collapse when external conditions change. This is one of the hidden purposes of pain, to relocate your foundation. Pain also reshapes your relationship with time. What once felt urgent begins to feel slower. What once felt permanent begins to feel temporary. What once felt overwhelming begins to be placed into perspective. You start to realize that not everything demands immediate resolution. Some things require endurance, not escape, and endurance changes you. It develops patience that is not passive but resilient. It forms strength that is not loud but steady. It creates a kind of maturity that cannot be rushed or imitated. This maturity becomes part of your spiritual structure, shaping how you respond to future challenges that resemble past ones, but require wiser navigation. There is also a mysterious way in which pain refines calling. It filters intention. It removes superficial motives. It forces honesty about why you pursue what you pursue. Many people discover in painful seasons that their reasons for certain desires were incomplete. And through that discovery, motives are purified. You begin to desire not just outcomes but alignment, not just success but authenticity, not just arrival but meaning. And in this shift, something internal begins to stabilize, even while external circumstances remain unresolved. You become less reactive to fluctuation and more attentive to formation. You start noticing that even in discomfort, there is movement happening beneath the surface that cannot yet be fully explained. There comes a moment in every life when hesitation stops feeling safe. A moment when delay begins to feel heavier than fear. A moment when the awareness of what you carry can no longer stay dormant without creating internal tension. It is not always dramatic on the outside, but inwardly something shifts. What was once tolerated becomes intolerable. What was once postponed becomes pressing. What was once a quiet sense of calling becomes an undeniable pull toward movement. This is the place where rising is no longer an option of convenience, but a response to something deeper within you that refuses to remain silent. To rise is not merely to elevate position or status. It is not about being seen more clearly by others, nor about achieving recognition. Rising begins internally long before it becomes visible externally. It begins in the alignment of identity with truth. It begins when you stop negotiating with doubt and start responding to conviction. It begins when the voice within you becomes louder than the voices around you that once shaped your limitations. There is a sacred tension in this moment, because stepping forward into what you are called to requires letting go of what has kept you safe. And safety, even when limiting, can feel familiar enough to resist change. But familiarity is not always alignment. Comfort is not always purpose. Stability is not always growth. Rising requires a willingness to move without full certainty. Not reckless movement, but obedient movement. The kind that does not wait for every question to be answered before taking the first step. The kind that trusts that clarity often follows action rather than precedes it. The kind that understands that delay in obedience often leads to distortion in direction. There is something deeply transformative about responding to what you know you are meant to do, even when your emotions have not fully caught up with your awareness, because awareness often arrives before readiness. You recognize truth before you feel prepared for it. You sense direction before you feel fully equipped. And in that gap between knowing and feeling ready, many people remain stuck. But rising means stepping into that gap anyway. It is in that space that courage is formed. Not the absence of fear, but movement in spite of it. Courage is not loud confidence, it is quiet obedience under pressure. It is choosing to move even when uncertainty has not yet dissolved. It is trusting that what has been placed within you is greater than what surrounds you. There is also a shift that occurs when you begin to rise. Responsibility becomes clearer. You start to realize that what you carry was never meant solely for personal validation. It was meant for impact. There are people, situations, environments, and moments that are connected to your expression in ways you cannot yet fully trace. Your obedience is not isolated, it is interconnected with outcomes beyond your immediate awareness. This understanding changes how you view your gifts. They are no longer just personal traits. They become assignments. They become tools. They become responses to needs that exist beyond your comfort zone. And with that realization, the weight of avoidance becomes heavier than the weight of obedience. Rising also demands honesty. Honesty about what has held you back. Honesty about what fears you have protected. Honesty about what excuses have disguised themselves as wisdom. There is a difference between discernment and delay disguised as caution. There is a difference between patience and avoidance masked as preparation. Rising requires clarity between these distinctions. There are moments when you will be tempted to wait for perfect timing. But perfect timing is often an illusion that keeps potential in suspension. Growth rarely announces itself with ideal conditions. More often it begins in imperfect environments where you must learn to move while still developing strength. This is where trust becomes essential. Trust not in outcomes, but in alignment. Trust not in immediate results, but in direction. Trust that what has been placed within you is not accidental and therefore will not fail simply because conditions feel uncertain. Rising also means releasing the need for external permission. There is a point where validation from others cannot be the gatekeeper of your obedience. If you wait for everyone to understand your calling before you move, you may never move at all. Understanding often follows expression, not precedes it. There is a quiet authority that develops when you begin to act in alignment with what you know internally, regardless of external affirmation. That authority is not arrogance, it is stability. It is the grounding that comes from no longer outsourcing your direction to external opinions. And yet, rising does not mean isolation from others. It means clarity within yourself. It means knowing what is yours to carry and what is not. It means understanding that while voices may surround you, not all voices are assigned to guide you. Discernment becomes part of the movement. As you begin to rise, resistance will not disappear. In fact, resistance often increases when movement begins. Doubt may resurface. External opposition may appear. Internal questions may intensify. But these are not signs of failure, they are signs of transition. Anything that carries weight into new territory often encounters friction. And friction is not always obstruction. Sometimes it is preparation for endurance. There is also a deep internal shift that occurs when you commit to rising. Identity stabilizes. You stop asking whether you are capable in the same way. You start becoming more concerned with alignment than approval. You begin to understand that capability grows through obedience, not prior assurance. This is where transformation becomes visible in behavior. Decisions become more intentional. Focus becomes more refined. Energy becomes more directed. What once scattered your attention begins to lose influence. What once distracted your purpose begins to lose appeal. Rising simplifies what confusion complicated. It does not eliminate challenge, but it clarifies direction. And in clarity, even difficulty becomes navigable. Because confusion is often more paralyzing than resistance. When direction is known, movement becomes possible even in difficulty. There is also something deeply humbling about rising. It removes the illusion of self-sufficiency. It reveals dependency on something greater than personal strength. It teaches reliance on guidance that cannot be manufactured internally. And in that humility, depth is formed. The process of rising is not instantaneous. It unfolds in stages. Small decisions accumulate into direction. Small acts of obedience accumulate into momentum. Small steps of courage accumulate into transformation. And over time, what once felt impossible begins to feel natural. But the beginning always feels unfamiliar. That unfamiliarity is not a warning, it is an invitation into expansion. Because growth always begins beyond the borders of comfort. And every time you step beyond those borders, you redefine what is possible within your life. There is a point where rising becomes less about effort and more about identity. Less about forcing movement and more about alignment with what you have become aware of within yourself. At that point, hesitation no longer feels like neutrality, it feels like resistance to truth that you already recognize.